This is the Finance and Operations Committee of the Board of Education. It is Thursday, October 10th. We're in the Nashua High School North Boardroom at 6 p.m. Ms. Porter, could you call the roll for me, seeing we are here?
Sure. Okay, Ms. Oden?
Yes.
Mr. Kaufman?
Here.
Mr. Moser?
I'm here.
We have Mr. Donovan, Mr. Smith, and Ms. Porter.
Okay, thank you. The first item on the agenda is really pleasant. We have Colby Nichols here, and he's going to give us a presentation of what he would like to do at Bicentennial School for his Eagle Scout project. So, Colby, if you want to go up and sit next to Mr. Smith. Thank you. Okay, and if you just want to give everybody some type of idea of what you're planning to do for Bicentennial.
If I could just introduce Colby. My name is Mike Mahoney. I'm the principal at Bicentennial. And to give you a little background first, Colby approached me about a year ago with this idea. So this is something that he's been working on for quite a long time. So I'll let him explain what exactly it is. But to let you know, this was something that was very thoughtful and did take some time on his part as well.
So he's been working on it for a year.
Exactly.
Wow, good for you, Colby. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mahoney.
So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be repainting old, really faded images that are already on the playground blacktop. And I'll also be adding a new walking path around the perimeter of it and a mascot.
Okay, and from reading it, it looks like you're looking to get 30 volunteers.
Yes.
And have you succeeded in some of that already?
I would estimate that I probably have about at least 20.
Oh, wow, good for you.
But I'm not entirely sure because the people at my church aren't the best at replying to emails and Facebook.
Oh, and I bet Mom and your little sister will volunteer to be there with you. Mm-hmm. Great, great. So you're looking for approval. Mr. Mahoney, how will this enhance the students' experience on the playground?
It does a couple things, actually, giving this a lot of thought, and things have kind of come together strangely because what Colby's going to do does actually support our SEL goal at our building too, but that wasn't something initially that Colby was aware of, and it just happens to merge together nicely. Our playground does need some work. Thankfully, Colby's going to do that for us, but recess isn't necessarily fun for everybody. It's not necessarily, for some students, it's the most anxious part of the day because they don't quite know what to do with themselves or how to fit in, especially the younger kids. They don't necessarily organize activities very well when they're 5 and 6 years old, nor do they necessarily want to do anything athletic, but they do want to be outside, they want to fit in, and they want to find their own way. The path especially, I think, is going to be something that's going to be great for all kids, and especially those kids that want to be outside, enjoy the outdoors, but don't necessarily want to compete with anybody. And part of that walking path, if you read through it, it's going to be very educational as well. So it does do that for us.
Right. Okay, any idea of your timeline, Colby, at this point?
So I will be the night before I do the painting, which originally what I was planning to do was the 11th and 12th, but we're likely to be rained out, so I postponed it to the 18th and 19th. And so on the night of the 18th, we will be using power washers and leaf blowers to clean the area, and then we'll be using crack filler to fill in the cracks because there's a lot of them on the playground. And then we were going to be setting up some cones and tape to make sure that nobody walks on it. And then the next day we were going to be doing the painting.
Oh, wow. Well, I hope you have good weather for the 18th and 19th. I guess we are supposed to get bad weather this weekend, so. Well, I'm looking for a motion. Mr. Kaufman, do you have any questions for Colby?
Actually, I do. I do want to say I'm thrilled to see another Eagle project here at the district. As an Eagle Scout, obviously I have vested interest in seeing that eagles continue to fly. I will suggest one thing I think you may have inadvertently left out when you talked about tools and equipment and other needs. Consider getting some gloves for the people who will be painting and things, because that, especially blacktop, can be very messy, and you want to minimize the paint, so gloves might also be helpful. But I am curious, so you'll just be reproducing or repainting that which is already there? You are going to add a mascot, but are you just essentially repainting that which has faded and gone into a little bit of disrepair?
Well, I'm going to be repainting, but I'm also doing a walking path all around the playground blacktop.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Happy to, may I make a motion?
I'm sorry, I just wanted to ask Mr. Moser if he had any questions. Mr. Moser, do you have any questions?
No, I don't have any questions, but let Mr. Kaufman make his motion, and I'll agree to it.
Okay. Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you. Move to approve the Eagle Scout Service Project as proposed by Colby Nichols.
Nichols.
I second it.
Okay. Roll call. Mr. Kaufman?
Yes.
Mr. Mosher?
Yes.
And Mrs. Oden is yes. Congratulations, Colby. I wish you the best of luck, and I wish you good weather.
Good weather.
So
Definitely good
I'll
weather.
be anxious to go down there and see that new display on the playground and the walking path. So thank you and congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay. Now Mr. Mahoney can go home and watch the Patriots. Okay. Next on the agenda is the solar updates. So we have some people here.
Here you go.
Okay. And if you'd like to introduce yourselves and tell us your title.
Well, hi, my name is Doria Brown, and I'm the new energy manager for the city of Nashua, and I'm excited to be here.
Okay.
And my name's Deb Chisholm. I am the project manager for the solar project that the city is implementing on the roof, currently at the roof of the Lake Street Fire Station, and soon to be on the transit garage on Riverside.
Okay.
So Doria and I are here to answer any questions that you might have about our solar project. I will say that we are working with Revision Energy. They actually, I guess you call it, they broke roof today at the Lake Street Fire Station instead of breaking ground. So they started their rooftop solar project, and Elijah and his team so far have been excellent to work with to get things up and running. So
Okay.
we're just here to support you guys
Okay.
with whatever questions you might have.
Okay. And could we introduce Elijah from Revision?
Sure.
Tell us a
Testing
little
out
bit
the
about.
mic first. Yeah, so I'm Elijah Garrison. I'm Director of Commercial and Institutional Solar with Revision Energy. I'm essentially here standing in for Dan Weeks, who had a family obligation tonight. But as you all know, or probably know at this point, Dan's a Nashua resident, highly committed to the community, and I know he's really excited to see projects moving forward with the city and for the opportunities that are in front of the school district. So I'm essentially a stand-in. I'm up to speed on what's going on with the project and the design, and very familiar with solar, so I can answer technical or financial questions around the project. And met with Sean maybe 3 weeks ago now. So we've kind of gone over the project as well. So anyway, that's why I'm here.
Okay, well, welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Donovan, I know the last time we talked about solar with Dan here, you had some questions that you wanted to have answered, I believe, from the city?
Yes, I met actually this week with Deb Chisholm and John Griffin, the CFO at the city, and went through a few things, so I'll sort of update you on some of the information I found out, and there's probably a couple of questions here that maybe Elijah, et cetera, can answer. But basically, we wanted to sort of find out a little how this process started with the city, because Sean had come forward and said, well, the city's signing a contract. At the last time we met, the city hadn't even signed the contract yet. So I figured, well, let's make sure this is actually moving forward. The city did send out an RFP back earlier in the year, received 4 responses, I believe, went through the process and ended up choosing Revision to be their solar provider. So they've gone through an RFP, they've done the investigations on the companies, and they actually have signed a contract, so there's a contract in place. I'm sure that's been reviewed by Steve Bolton, et cetera, at the city. So a lot of the work for the school department is already done, and Sean's idea then was to piggyback onto this contract instead of going through the whole process ourselves. So at least that gave me more comfort around that. At this point in time, I believe the plans for Revision in the city are the transit garage, which Deb mentioned, the Lake Street Fire Station you've started. You're also going to do the transit station and then plans for Conway Arena, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so a little bit about what we're looking at this program. We have in place an agreement with the firm that's building a solar farm in Milton, New Hampshire. And have they started yet, Sean, or are they?
I don't believe they have. They're still going through some legislative issues, but still everything is on track.
Right, but we will, when they get up and running, we will basically be receiving a check each quarter or each year from them. We're not necessarily going to be using their power because they're in Milton, New Hampshire, but we will be getting a check. And was that about 130,000? Is that?
It's a penny for X number of kilowatt hours, and it amounts to about 130,000.
Okay.
I did check with them also to see if we put solar on a roof, i.e. Dr. Crisp or any other place, that would have any impact upon with our agreement with them, and the answer was no. If we consume fewer kilowatt hours, which we certainly would through the grid, then that 130 would go down slightly.
Okay.
Say to 125 or something like that.
All right, so we have that in place. That can stay in place. The other thing we already have in place now is we purchase our power from Agera Energy, okay? So we have, right now we're paying 6.9 cents per kilowatt hour for that, okay? That agreement runs through
Next November.
November of 2020, right? And obviously when we'll work with the city again, and Doria, welcome to the city. We'll be working, assuming we're going to continue to do that, because we're not going to have solar on all our roofs a year from now. So we'll be looking at another agreement, and we don't really know what rates are going to be, but we typically try to lock in for a 2 or 3 year period. So in this plan, we can, in a sense, compare. It's going to be 8.8 cents using a PPA, correct, Elijah?
Yep.
Okay. So in a sense, that's a little bit more expensive. I'm doing the math simply here first. It's 6.9 cents to 8.8 cents. One's higher than the other. The difference based on using Sean's grid is about $375,000. So based on the kilowatt hours you showed that was used in 2019, it's about $375,000 more based on that. But what needs to be factored in is we're going to have excess power on the solar at Dr. Crisp, right? Excess.
Yeah, so I guess one quick point of clarification, and let me see, I think I have a good roof image here.
If I could interject just something. So you're comparing the 8.8 to the 6.9.
As a
Well,
base.
Right. Any electrical bill you get has two parts, right? It's how much do you consume, and then all the other charges. And it's about 50-50 between the two. So the other 50% that we're paying is, I don't know, 14 or 15 cents a kilowatt hour. So it's not just 6.9 to the 8.8. You take the 6.9, add in the 14.5, and then, so your number's actually higher than the 8.8 at this point. So, what would we pay for a kilowatt hour would actually go down with this
Because we're not
program.
paying the transmission cost.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
thank
then
you,
the other
Sean.
thing is, I checked with Agera Energy, who's the third-party provider, and they said, I asked them specifically, if we put solar on a roof, does that affect your agreement? And they said no.
Right.
So,
I'm sorry. Can you please repeat that?
so our third-party provider is Agera Energy for the next year. That's who we have the contract with. And I asked them specifically, if we put solar on a roof, does that affect our agreement with them? And they said no.
Yeah, sort of, did we have a maximum or minimum purchase from them that we had to make, and we don't? So if we simply use less power supply from them is probably a better, then we're still fine. There's no penalty on our agreement. Sometimes those exist.
Yeah, so if I may, there's not to get too complicated, there's actually 6 different pieces of an electric bill. But I guess the key point that Sean alluded to is when you consume energy behind the meter. So, I brought the image up because you can see, panels are really just collectors of the sun's energy, and then you have inverters that are converting the DC to AC and will be feeding your main distribution panel. If you're using energy at the same time the solar is being produced, that looks like load reduction to the utility, and the value is your supply rate plus your transmission and distribution plus your system benefit charge plus your stranded cost recovery. So there's another value stack of probably an additional 4 cents that you're getting for every kilowatt hour you consume behind the meter. And then the second thing is, if you're exporting to the grid, which would also happen with a solar array, you're producing energy when you're not using it. I would say particularly during the summer months when the building probably seeing lower usage. When you activate a solar array, you're converting to default supply. The value of every kilowatt hour you export is the default supply rate. So when you switch over to solar, you're sending energy back to the grid not for 6.9 cents, but for the default supply rate, which is a little more than 9 cents. So that's just a couple points there.
Can I ask, you mean you can sell it back for more than what you can buy it for?
So
I understand that?
not exactly. So what happens is you'll get a higher rate when you consume it yourself. You get a slightly lower rate when you send it back to the grid. But the value of that export is higher than what you're currently paying your third-party supplier to import.
Okay, how much lower?
How much higher is the export rate? Is that?
No, when you sell it back, how much lower?
Yep.
is it?
Yeah, so it's about 4 cents.
About 4 cents
Like
lower?
I said, so it's, yeah, right. So you would get, closer to 13 cents behind the meter and 9 cents when you export. Those are round numbers. I can get you the exact number.
No, you said when you use it and the sun's out and it's there, it's cheaper. What happens when you have a week of rain?
Yeah, so I guess you look at the production there, that's an annual model that factors in a bunch of different things. This is a tool called helioscope. And so what you have there is factoring in the angle of the sun throughout a day and throughout the year. And the reason you see December, January, February minimal production is because you have a flat roof and it's going to be covered in snow for most of those months. The sun's also going to be at a lower angle. So the holistic answer is that we model in weather conditions into our production estimate. The practical answer is that when you don't get power from solar, you're getting it from the grid. You'll import that energy, just like you are now.
And the price of that is 8.8?
Yep, that's correct. Yep.
And it goes up 2% each year for the first 5 years?
We expect utility rates, whether you're on third-party supply or default, to increase by about 2.5% per year. The PPA itself has a 2% escalator that starts in year 3. So the PPA is specifically designed to hedge against future utility cost increases and to increase at a slower rate than we expect inflation. So the purpose of that is so that you can increase your savings over time.
May I interject for a second?
I just have one more question.
Yep.
It starts in year 3, which I didn't realize. Does it go on for every year?
Yes. The PPA is set up so you have buyout opportunities starting in year 6. And that's another sort of benefit of the vehicle. I guess to back up one step, the purpose of the solar PPA is the district does not pay federal taxes. So therefore not able to monetize the tax benefits that are associated with solar. So PPA structure is an investor agreeing to put up all of the capital for the solar array, no upfront cost. And they recoup that investment through tax benefits and then through the energy revenues, which are the PPA payments. And so in essence, it's a 25-year term. So you would have the option to just stay in the PPA and pay that PPA rate for 25 years. A generally better option is to eventually purchase the asset, own it, and have all of that value flow directly to the school. And that starts in year 6 due to the IRS rules. You start in year 6, you have an opportunity to buy it out at 60% of today's cost. And then each year that cost will go down a little bit. So you have the choice of saying, do we have the capital to purchase it now, or do we want to continue in the PPA for another year? So it gives you a nice flexibility there where you can either say, we want to stay in the PPA and continue, seeing those, what I would describe as sort of more moderate savings, or we're now ready to make a capital expenditure, purchase the asset outright, and see more value.
And if we purchase it outright, are we then responsible for anything that would go wrong in the system?
Yep, we would strongly recommend that you sign an operations and maintenance agreement once you own the asset, which is during the period of the PPA, the investor will be responsible for operations and maintenance and insurance of the property. Yep.
Okay, somebody want to speak? I'm sorry. Yes.
I have a question that might
If you
help.
pull the mic,
Thank you. First time here.
Yeah?
I have a question that I'm hoping might clarify one of your questions. You asked about snowfall, or you brought up snowfall and it covering the panels, and then where are we buying energy when the snow is covering the panels? It's my understanding that we'd be buying the energy off the grid, and we wouldn't be paying that 8 cents that we would pay in the PPA. It would be whatever rate we've negotiated with our third-party supplier, which might be a Garrison or might be somebody else at that point. So you wouldn't be paying that 8 cents. You could be paying the rate that you negotiated with your third-party supplier. So when you're not generating solar, you're still buying energy off of the grid. You'll have essentially 2 suppliers. You'll have your PPA person who you're getting your solar from, and then you'll have your third-party supplier, which is what we have right now when we're purchasing energy off of the grid. So if I'm incorrect, please stop me.
Yeah, it depends a little bit on how your metering is set up. So in this specific case, we would be recommending Dr. Crisp move to default supply for the meter.
Okay.
When you're doing a relatively modest system with massive load, which is probably what was happening at Worthen, you're probably not exporting anything. It's all behind the meter. When you're entirely behind the meter, you can stay on third-party supply.
Yep.
Or if you're participating in a group net meter arrangement. But when the meter that you're physically tied into, in order to receive net metering benefits, has to go to default supply.
Understood.
Because the third-party suppliers are not required to participate in net metering, and therefore they don't.
Yep, so we would be on that default supply rate. Understood.
For that single meter, correct. The remaining 16 schools would not be affected. Yep.
Okay, I have some more questions, but I'll ask if any of the, Mr. Kaufman, you have some questions?
I was curious, are we going to go through this presentation again for Mrs. Porter wasn't here for it?
I'd be happy to.
I mean, I'm just curious, or if we just go to discussion, then I have a comment, but I didn't want to preempt what was planned, so I don't know what, I mean, there was a general agreement at the last board meeting. We deferred a vote because, at least my intent to defer a vote was so the rest of the board who was interested could come and find out what this was all about. Unfortunately, we only have one member. Thank you for coming. So for Ms. Porter's benefit, for people in the public, I mean, I don't know, that's up to Mrs. Oden, how she wants to move forward. Because then I can ask my questions that I asked last week in the context of the presentation. So I don't know what Mrs. Oden wants to do.
Well, Ms. Porter, did you see the presentation?
I didn't watch
No.
it, but I could.
Okay, why don't you give us the presentation, and then Ms. Porter, who has made the time to come here, and Dan, you weren't?
I was here.
Oh, you were here, okay, so we will have that, and if you people would like to add anything as he's going through this, because I have a few more questions that
Can
I'll
we ask
wait,
questions as
and-
we go? Because I think it'll help the
Certainly.
discussion.
Certainly.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
so I tend to try to breeze through slides pretty quickly. So please, stop me if you have questions as we go. So I guess this will be review for most of you. Just really quick, this is the Dover Technical High School, new construction, 900 kilowatt rooftop project, which was energized a few months ago. So very exciting, I guess sort of the nexus of energy and technical education in our state. Just real quick, for those of you who aren't familiar with Revision Energy, we started as sort of two guys in a garage tinkering with solar in Liberty, Maine. 16 years later, we're north of 250 employee owners. We're a fully employee-owned company. We do focus mostly on solar, but we do try to approach clean energy as a holistic transition. We see that as a need and an opportunity for New England to have energy independence and lower our costs through solar and other associated technologies.
Elijah, where were you in that picture?
Usually in the back. I think you can see me next to the bearded guy with the chimney in the back there, kind of to the right. I'm always in the back in the company pictures. Just real quick, some of the nonprofits that we've worked with, I'm sure you recognize many of the names. Commercial clients that we have, that we've done projects for. Just a quick sample of some of the recent municipal projects. Obviously, we are grateful and proud to add City of Nashua to the mix here. I personally worked on the City of Keene project, so that was a pretty exciting one. Came online right at the end of last year. Just a quick snapshot of some of the different accreditations that we have. Let's see. And so this is kind of the design and engineering process. I guess where we are, there's been obviously some discussions in the past about solar opportunities for the school. I think seeing some momentum in the city has brought some additional discussion, and I think we're really focused on Dr. Chris primarily due to Sean's direction, saying that this is a building that's suitable and ready, a recent new roof, as I understand. So I guess the first thing that happens in design is site selection. And a lot of school districts would say, Nashua has 17 schools. It's a lot to chew to think about solar on all of the schools, so let's pick a single school to focus on as kind of an example project to get things started. Maybe there'll be future opportunities. But this particular roof is obviously a flat roof. And so with a flat roof, what you have is a ballast system. So there's no penetration of the roof. You're putting essentially, it's either plastic or metal trays depending on the racking system, and you're putting concrete blocks every certain amount of feet per the engineering specs. And the panels, as you can see, are sort of sitting horizontally at a 10-degree pitch off the roof. And so you can see, the layout is making sure that we meet setbacks. So there's a 6-foot setback from all of the edges of the roof. And then you've got access paths for all of the rooftop units. So that's kind of the design. And then, with a flat roof, you're generally just trying to fill it, use the space as much as you can to get the most production. So that's essentially the design here. You can see we're at about 330 kilowatts DC. That number comes from the total number of panels times the wattage of the panels. This design is using REC 350 watt panels. The AC rating is the inverter capacity. So with a rooftop system, we use inverter called a solar edge inverter with DC optimizers. So there's actually an optimizer for every 2 panels, which does a couple of things. I can get into that if you like, but essentially the inverter is the brains of the system. And you can see there's a little bit of an oversize there. We push the DC a little bit higher than the AC, and that sort of maximizes the efficiency of your production. Then the bottom number you see there, the 375,800 kilowatt hours, is actually the total production that we expect from the system over the course of an entire year. And so, you can see that kind of wonky chart on the right there, but that's your sort of how you get to that number, is you have X amount of capacity times Y amount of solar access, which yields that level of production. So we use 40 years of weather data from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, and we run it through this fairly sophisticated model that gives you a pretty accurate picture of what the production is going to be. Sure.
What is the power loss on the conversion from DC to AC?
It's pretty minimal these days. It's less than 1%. Yep. So I think you can actually, let's see. Yeah, 1%. Exactly. That's what it says right there. Inverters 1%.
Not one. Excuse me. I got questions.
Sure.
I understand the conversion factor on going from DC to AC, and 1% is a very efficient state. Usually, it's a little higher than that, but that is a different case. Regarding the batteries, have you had any instances yet of failure of the batteries, and like some of the automobiles that are being powered by batteries that have had batteries overheat, and also some of the airlines that have had problems with it using the same kind of batteries, where the batteries would overheat, and actually in some cases they would catch fire or explode. Have you had any failures of that nature yet?
Yeah, so to clarify, this solar project is batteries not included. There's no storage involved in this project. This is purely a solar energy system, which will be using grid tied. So you are net metering back and forth with the grid, not storing the energy.
They're not storing energy, because my other question was on the energy storage, and I was comparing the batteries to capacitors, and that seems to be another way of storing power in capacitors. And when the weather permitted, they could switch over from the batteries to bleeding off the stored energy in the capacitors. But since you are not using any of that, that's moot.
Yep, you could certainly add storage to the system at a future date, but at this point, there isn't really an incentive to do so financially. And so we've essentially omitted batteries from this project. Sure.
Thank you. So if I remember correctly, Dan, right?
I'm Elijah.
No,
In
you're.
place of Dan, yes.
Yes, so last time we met, to produce the amount of electricity, given the capabilities of the panels, we're looking about 1,000 panels on the roof, right?
Yeah, so the number varies by manufacturer, but it's generally 5 to 7 pounds per square foot of solar coverage.
No, I wasn't concerned about I'm just making the point, we're talking about putting 1,000 solar panels on the roof. Is that correct? I'm not concerned about the way it'll be distributed, but just sheer scale and scope is we're talking about 1,000 solar panels.
Yeah, it would round up to
Somewhere
1,000. Close enough.
near
Yes.
1,000.
Correct. Yeah.
We don't know the number, right?
I can figure it out.
So, yeah, but just so people understand, this is a lot of technology on the roof. It doesn't look like 1,000 pieces there, but that's what that would be. Now, I'm curious, does the financial projections that you provide include, so at the end of life, 25 or 40 years, whatever we might get out of these things, does your financial model include the retirement and disassembly and disposal of the panels, assuming we stayed in the PPA for the duration?
So that makes a difference. Who owns the asset does make a difference. The short answer is no, that we don't have a specific number here for disassembly after 40 years. In the PPA, there is specific terms about what happens at the end of 25 years. And generally speaking, you've reached the end of your buyout schedule and you can purchase your solar array. And I guess to be clear, the warranty that the manufacturer is providing is 85% of today's nominal output in 25 years. So you would have a system that is 85% as useful as today in 25 years. You have the opportunity to purchase that asset at what's called salvage value, or essentially pennies on the dollar. So what we would recommend planning for is purchasing the asset at that time. If you choose not to, then the investor would be responsible for removing the array. But again, so at the end of the PPA term, investor is responsible. If you do purchase it and then you run it for another 15, 20 years, and then you decide to disassemble it, the school district would be responsible for that.
So my concern is cash, right? The district does not have currently funds to even buy this out in year 6, even if it's a nominal $400,000. Okay, so we would, in my opinion, any agreement we enter would be a long-term agreement with a PPA and the subsequent maintenance contracts that clearly we would need to purchase. We tend to do that. We do have maintenance contracts on critical systems. And if we're going to put this kind of a solar array on our roof and depend on it, we clearly need those contracts. I'm curious about the disposal of the panels. Are there any harmful materials, not heavy metals, but rare earth metals, or maybe heavy metals? I don't even know what's in these things. Some of these solar panels use cadmium. I don't know about these particular panels. In other words, we want to be green, but sometimes the panels themselves in their disposal process really contaminate at the back end, not necessarily during their life. So I'm curious if you can comment on that.
Sure. So solar technology as it exists has been really taken off in the last 10 years or so. So there certainly is not a robust market of these solar systems ending their useful life and needing to be disposed of. With that said, the solar recycling industry is starting to take off. And you have essentially glass, silicone, and metal in a solar panel. So all are materials that could be recycled for sure.
Are these panels made in the United States?
So the REC panels it's a Norwegian-based company. That's where they're engineering. Most of their module manufacturing is in Singapore. A lot of the silicon that they're sourcing is from the United States. As with basically anything these days, it's a global supply chain. I would say, where Revision draws the line is we source what are called Tier 1 modules. So that's a certain level of quality within the equipment, and it is what's called bankable. So your 25-year warranty, they've been evaluated for financial solvency, saying that they would actually be able to back a 25-year warranty. I guess in terms of country of origin, we tend to be fairly agnostic. We try to look out for our clients' financial best interest. We tend to draw the line on, cheap panels coming out of China. Those we don't generally purchase. But when we find something that's equal, generally slightly better quality for lower cost, it's fairly hard to justify, fully American-made panels. I could go into that further. I guess I would just say even the companies that are doing American-based manufacturing are generally not American-owned. So it's a global supply chain. We try to purchase the panel that's highest quality and meets our clients' financial goals.
Can I ask another question about the finance and the investor, or?
Sure.
I know you have slides about later on. You want to do it later, it's fine. Till you get there.
Whatever works for you. I guess I would just show the picture of what the flat roof install looks like, so you have that picture in mind, how it all comes together. That's when we were talking about inverters. That's the equipment that you would have in your electrical room or in an outside wall.
How many would we have, just so people would understand? Because this is really big, right? This particular install, what we would have would be much less, if I remember what Dan had said last time.
Yeah, I should know that number, but forgive me for being the stand-in here. I believe the answer is 9.
9 of those, okay. So we'd have a bank that's larger than that. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
And that would be on the outside of the building, right? That's what he was
Most
suggesting.
likely. I'm not sure. I didn't do the site walk, but most likely we would put it on the outside wall rather than an electrical room. Space is usually tight.
And just for the public's benefit, they did say that they would kind of fence it in, just
Probably a good idea.
For security purposes.
Yep.
If I could, ideally, that would be on the backside of the cafeteria or gym. So facing all the fields, not the front of the school, be in the back. So the general public wouldn't even see them.
Now, is there any electromagnetic, I don't know what the word is even, risk attached? What was that, Mr. Moser?
You're talking about electromagnetic radiation.
Thank you, the word radiation. So, because if you're going to have 9 of those things, and there's a lot of electricity going through that, is there any health concerns attached to that? Do they have to be shielded, or is there extra shielding, or the boxes themselves carry that shielding?
Yeah, it's a self-contained unit. There's nothing being emitted that's harmful. I mean, generally homeowners are putting the same equipment in their home. I have one in my house. It's not a harmful piece of equipment.
Well, 1 versus 9. You know what I'm saying? And if the kids are out there playing or coming close to it, I was just curious.
No, I mean, the UL lab checks every piece of equipment that goes out the door and can be sold in the market. It's pretty regulated equipment.
Okay.
Can I get in there?
Yeah, certainly, Mr. Moser.
Yeah, the question of radiation, there is no radiation that is emitted from the equipment. It's the same 60 cycle that you have in your home, and you get from your fuse box, and there's no harmful radiation from household current or the current that would be used in the commercial area like the school. So you can rest assured that there would be no harmful rays of any kind that would be emanating from the equipment. Maybe just a little hum here and there.
It does make a little bit of noise, that's true. Here's the manufacturer's specifications. Just to give you an idea of how long it takes, generally somewhere in the 12 to 16 week range. This is kind of a list of all the different steps, but, you have to apply through the utility. So again, another sort of piece of regulation is making sure they can accept the backfeed from the solar array. There's a permitting process, so, that involves structural analysis on a flat roof, but basically pulling building and electrical permits with the city. And then, finalizing your layout, procuring materials, and then doing the actual installation. Sure.
So when would this be installed when school is in session? When would the actual construction work happen?
Well, we haven't quite made it that far, but assuming that, things move forward, I guess the timing's TBD. Again, it's about 16 weeks is sort of the minimum time. If you wanted to try to schedule it so that the construction started in June after school was let out, I think that would be doable. I don't remember exactly what we talked about in terms of timing, but I think summer is certainly doable, if that's preferable.
Yeah, we had talked about summer. I mean, you got over 2 months of time chewed up just in getting permitting and everything else.
Yeah, that's the main thing, is if you want it installed in June, you can't sign a contract in May because there's, 3 months of utility work that has to happen before you can even install it.
Who would pay for all these permits?
Yep, great question. So the investor pays for essentially a turnkey solar project. So soup to nuts is the colloquial expression, but what is actually happening is the investor is hiring Revision Energy, Inc., the construction company, to do all of that work. So Revision Energy would do all of that work, and we would get paid by the investor.
Okay, if you want to continue.
So this is where we get into
I'm sorry, Sean, I'm sorry.
It's okay, I just thought of something. Deb and I were talking. So generally speaking, in municipal projects, we don't pay for permitting.
Okay.
The city waives that fee.
Okay.
I know that's certainly been my experience with anything doing with construction.
Okay.
And even small renovations, if we add a wall in a classroom in a school, we pull a permit, but it doesn't cost us anything.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have a friend at City Hall?
We've got two right here.
There you go.
We wish we got the same response from Eversource. Anyway, so this is the financing section. Do you want me to walk through this, or do you want to fire away with your question?
Yes, this is
Yeah.
absolutely important for people to understand. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, so I guess I alluded to it a little bit at the beginning, but essentially the PPA is a financing vehicle to allow you to access the benefits of solar without a upfront capital purchase and without leaving the fairly substantial tax benefits on the table. So that's the sort of the challenge that is overcome with the PPA. The vehicle that is the PPA is, if you boil it down, it's basically two parts. One is the license. So it is, the school district would license the investor to site, own, and operate the solar asset in accordance to the specifications in the PPA. So that's one piece, is the right to use the property. And then the second piece is purchasing the kilowatt hours in accordance with the schedule. So that's really the kind of the two core pieces of the PPA. And then not all PPAs have a buyout, but Revision Energy is a strong believer that folks owning their own solar equipment is in their best interest. So we only work with investors that will offer this buyout opportunity as part of the package. So starting in year 6, you'll have the opportunity to do the buyout, fully optional. So to the gentleman's point, you can put it on whatever schedule makes sense for the school district. If it makes sense to have a 10-year plan to purchase it, put it on a 10-year plan. Each year you have the option to buy or the option to continue in the PPA. Questions on that?
Ms. Porter?
Okay, so if the buyout cost is $386,000 after 6 years, right?
Correct.
Okay, so which budget does that come out of? Is that a city budget or the school budget?
That would have to be either the school operating budget, or it would be some sort of capital thing. I mean, it's a good question. If you want to buy it at 6, 7, 8 years, whatever, you're going to have a significant sum to pay for it. There's nothing planned in our financial future. Then again, I don't think the city has looked ahead 6 years on anything as far as financially speaking. So I don't think it's been done, but it's not like there's no money put aside for it now.
We're not escrowing for any,
No, not at this point. Could we? Maybe. Maybe that might be something to discuss as we go ahead.
Would the city be able to bond that expense at that time in the future?
The city can bond things like that as long as
There's still value in it?
and it's going to last for the period of the bond. So if you want to get a 10-year bond after 6 years and they last 25 years, you could do that.
So, okay, I'll wait for my comments until after you do the next slide.
Okay. I have one question. Looking at the original cost to the investor and then our ability to buy it at the depreciated rate, I think there's a difference somewhere around $257,000. Can you tell me what type of tax advantage in dollars and cents comes back to the investor during the first 5 years?
So the buyout is, I guess, one point of clarification. The buyout schedule sets the floor. As a PPA, you cannot offer a specific buyout amount in the future, or what you actually have is a lease, and it doesn't meet the IRS requirements. So what you have is the buyout schedule, and what is available is the greater of that schedule or fair market value. We do think that buyout schedule is conservative enough that you would be extremely unlikely you'd pay higher than that. But so that's the buyout schedule. The second part of the question was there's a 30% investment tax credit, steps down from 30% to 26% starting next year. So that's available to any commercial entity that wants to purchase solar. And then there is a depreciation benefit. The value of that benefit varies by the marginal tax rate of the investor. So generally what you see is high net worth individuals that are paying really high tax rates. So they can see the benefit of that. But as a general rule of thumb, it's about 50% of the initial project cost is covered by tax benefits.
That's a combination of the depreciation and the 2630, depending upon when you implement it.
Correct. Yep.
so are these New Hampshire investors? Where are these people from?
Good question. Revision has been doing PPAs since about 2011. When we first started doing PPAs, I guess for us it's really mission work. We saw a segment of the market that was underserved by solar, particularly when the 25D and the other tax incentives came online. And so originally we were doing solar projects on our own balance sheet. We were actually providing the financing. We're a private business, so we had tax liability, and we would actually fund the projects and wipe out our tax bill, plus get to build solar, plus folks in the community benefited, kind of a win-win. October 2017, we converted to an ESOP, fully employee-owned company. So we're now a tax-exempt organization. We no longer have any tax liability. We no longer have any ability to directly invest in solar projects. The silver lining is that we were able to put a bunch of effort into putting a investor document stack and the legal requirements to set up sort of a portfolio style approach to PPAs. And so there's a standardized approach to funding PPAs that allows different individuals to invest. But to answer your question, everyone, not 100% of the investors are either New Hampshire, Maine, or Massachusetts based. And they are all interested in investing in the local communities, specifically in solar. So we don't, and they're also willing to take below market returns. I think that's an important point. Like, if you took a solar project and tried to shop it on the, sort of standard capital market, a project like this basically would not work. You'd need a bigger project to attract a, sort of institutional investor. What we've done is we've been able to make the transaction more efficient and drive down the cost of capital in that way to make solar work financially. So I guess the specific investor doesn't necessarily want their name known. I mean, obviously, high net worth individuals tend to be pretty private, but I guess in the case of the Nashua projects, I think some folks in town know who it is, but it's generally, folks that are local business owners that are interested in contributing to the community.
So are they pooling the money, or it can be a single person, or it can be pooling several people?
Yep, it depends on the project.
Okay.
I have a question, and maybe my understanding of my math is wrong, but from the solar PPA overview full portfolio, they pay $643,681 to invest in this. They get 5 years of the tax incentive that's approximately 50%, which comes to about $321,840. So they're getting that tax break, yet when we go to buy, they would also make money on our buyout, because that's $386,209. So not only would they make money on the tax break, they're also selling the depreciated equipment to us, and then we take responsibility for it, and they're making profit on that. Am I seeing that right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would express it in a slightly different way. I mean, do you know anyone that will give you $650,000 for free?
Oh, well, it's not, well, it's a tremendous advantage to them.
Well, I guess that's a relative statement. As opposed to putting $650,000 in the stock market and making 12% return, it's much worse. So this is certainly, impact investors are specifically saying, I'm not putting my money where I can make maximum return. I'm putting my money where I can make a reasonable return and also make maximum impact. So that's what's happening here.
But I think you're not guaranteed 12% in the stock market. Whatever you put in here, you have a guarantee. So this is a piece of your investment. Thus, a high worth person would do this. They'd have stock market. They'd have a diversified portfolio. So I don't think we can compare those two things. If you just had this, you probably wouldn't do this. You might not put it all in the market either. But
Is the tax advantage to the investor, it's just the first year they put the money in, 26 to 30%? Or is it every year for the whole term of the agreement of the PPA?
So it's a one-time tax event. How they actually monetize it is
Okay. So
individual
it
tax
sounded
return conversation with a CPA.
Okay. Sounded like Ms. Oden thought maybe it was every year for the 5 years. When you were doing your math, I didn't quite follow it, but you were talking about the tax advantage, and I guess my point is it's just the first year, it's not every year of the 5 years or 6 years.
Well, isn't there two factors? You have the first year, which would be the tax advantage. First year, they've changed the schedule of how much tax, the reduction of tax liability is, 30% now. Next year, it goes down to 27 and 25. It's going down over the next several years. So the sooner they do the project, the higher the tax abatement, if I can call it that. The other part of that is, to Mrs. Oden, they do get depreciation for the remainder of those 5 or 6 years. So they get the tax hit, where when we say tax hit, you think paying taxes. In this instance, it's a reduction off their tax bill.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then they subsequently get whatever the depreciation is, they write that off as part of their business.
Right,
And
but
to
there's-
Mrs. Oden's point, they actually, after a 5 or 6-year investment, they get all their money back with a combination of the tax liability reduction, if I can call it that, and the running of the business model, which depreciation picks up the rest of it. Once they extract their original investment, the way I look at it is here, take it. Because it has no more value to the investor. They've extracted all the money that they're going to get out of it, and then they're kind of dumping it on the municipalities. So it's kind of like, here I am, a high net worth person. I have a lot of tax liability. So I've got a way to invest, make it look, I'm going to get all my money back at the end of 5 or 6 years if I can sell this asset off. And then the tax liability is no more, but the operational liability becomes that responsibility to the district, which taxpayers then pick up. So not only does this investment relieve people of a tax burden, they end up giving the taxpayers a burden, especially if they buy it out later on. So I don't think it's a good business deal for the district. I'll be voting against it. I think it's a great deal. I do want to ask this question. Do you have PPAs for geothermal investment in an institution like a school? Because in that case, I believe it's worth it to the district, but I don't believe it's the case for a PPA for solar. But does Revision Energy provide PPAs in a geothermal installation for, say, a school building? Because quite frankly, to me, I'd love to talk to you about that if we ever get the conversation going for the new middle school.
No, Revision does not do geothermal systems.
Okay, thank you.
Elijah, did I misunderstand you? I thought what you said is they get about 50% of the cost back with the tax breaks that they have.
Any business owner that invests in solar can receive about 50% of the cost back through solar tax.
So not 100% of the cost, and I understand this depreciation, but what I understood was about 50% they get back, and that's where I got my figure of $321,840. If they're going to get that much back, that's about 50% of the cost. Is that right? Mathematically, am I doing this correctly?
Sort of. I mean, there's certainly costs associated with owning and operating and maintaining the asset as well.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it comes out to a moderate return.
Okay.
That's what's required to attract capital. If you had somebody that would give you $650,000 as a donation, that would be a better deal, but that's not what we see happening in the market.
Okay.
What ends up happening is essentially shared value.
Now, if we buy that, and the school district doesn't have close to $400,000, and if we did have extra, we'd probably be spending it on our kids. But if the city might want to pick it up, that might be different and bond it. But what are we then responsible? Are we responsible for all of the equipment, all the repairs, the insurance, and everything that goes with the system? Once that lease is up after 5 years, we buy it in the year 6, it's then we own it. Is that correct?
Yeah, so you have that option. So I guess, the graph here shows you what the picture looks like. The first 5 years, you're reducing operating costs on a net basis by a certain amount. And then should you choose to exercise your buyout option at the first available opportunity, the drop there is the capital outlay. So this assumes a cash buyout. If you wanted to do a finance buyout, we can model that pretty easily. You would just say, again, what's the term of the debt? What's the interest rate? If you could bond the buyout at 2 or 3%, that might look pretty good. This is just based on a cash buyout. And so, yes, once you are receiving all of the benefits from the asset, you are also fully responsible for the asset. Yep. And that's, I guess, those costs are baked into this model.
Okay.
Yep.
And if we owned it, would we basically have our electricity free?
Yeah, in essence, that's correct. Yep.
Okay.
What would be the monthly?
Excuse
I'm
me,
sorry.
can you, I'd like to ask Mr. Moser, do you have any questions or comments at this point?
I'm listening to it very carefully.
Okay, thank you.
I
Mr.
think that the finances on this are very convoluted, and if we were to go into that, I would insist on having a thorough evaluation of the finances that would be involved. And I tend to think a little bit like Howard now in my thoughts. And I still need more information, and I would need a much deeper evaluation of the costs and benefits before I would say yes or no.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mrs. Oden. So Mrs. Oden asked the question, if we were to purchase, essentially would our electricity be free in the future? If we were to purchase the system, we'd be responsible for 1,000 panels on top of the roof at Dr. Crisp, all the electronics that are associated with it, the inverters, and who knows what else is involved in the system. But okay, just like you maintain a car, you might have a service contract, or you have a household air conditioner system, you have a maintenance contract. And like I said earlier, I think the school district acts responsibly for major mechanical systems by putting service contracts in place. We're actually quite good at that, and Mr. Smith rides herd on that and keeps us honest, and we make sure that we keep these systems running. So associated with Mrs. Oden's comment is this question: what would be assuming we purchased at some point in time, what would be the monthly maintenance cost? Because it can never be free. The electricity can never be free, because we're going to have, at a minimum, have a service contract on all those panels and the equipment. So what would a service contract cost, even in the event, A, we purchased, or B, we get past the 5th year? I guess if we continue with the PPA, the owner or the investor is responsible for everything. So in the event of a buyout, what would be an example of a monthly maintenance contract for a system like this?
Sure, good question. I guess just to give you an idea of the operation of the system, so let me just show you the pictures here. So you have panels, ballast, and wiring on a roof. Those are all inert materials. Nothing's moving up there. You will generally not see any failure. The inverters will wear out over time. So inside the inverters, there's electronics and circuits. And so what we have modeled is a replacement of the inverters in year 21, which is generally the end of their useful life. So in terms of mechanical moving equipment, that's what it is right there, the inverter. To answer your question on the O&M piece, it scales with the size of the system, and it also, there are different options in terms of how rigorous you want to be with your service package, but assuming you would just do kind of the basic annual inspection and report, and then there's a few other things that go into it, but essentially that package is, I think, about $1,600 a year for a system of this size.
1,600?
Yep.
Okay. So if I just can point out, Mrs. Oden, you asked the question, well, the comment came up about financing the system, after year 6, and maybe if we got a 2 or 3% interest rate, that might be attractive. But realize here, if you look at the 4th entry where it talks about the PPA rate escalator after year 2, it goes up 2% a year. So if you were to start financing, we would have an additional cost that would kick in just in that 8.8 cents rate. We don't get that 8 cents rate forever. We only get it for the first 2 years. So it's built-in escalation. So we need to, it's nice to compare, but at some point it's probably going to catch up to Eversource. And my guess is it's probably after year 6. But But I personally thought the maintenance was going to be a lot more than $1,600 a year, so I'm happy to
Yeah,
have
and to
that
be clear, the
clarified.
25-year savings number includes that,
Oh,
as
okay.
well as year 21 inverter replacement.
Okay.
So it seems like this group would benefit from seeing the detailed cash flow model that shows column by column what is included in the model, because I think there's several assumptions being made that are actually already baked into the model. So this is just a summary of what that model spits out. Yep.
Could I ask, what's the, I see where the inverters are warranted for 12 years. What's the replacement cost for an inverter?
That's a good question. It's generally about 5 or 6 cents per watt. So again, that's in the model, which we can share the exact number of what that is, but let's see. Do that math. Yeah, it's probably between 1,500 and 2,000 per inverter to replace. We're talking about 9 inverters. So you're talking about a year 21 line item cost of something like $13,500. I will say that in 21 years, we do expect inverter costs to drop quite a bit, but that would be in today's dollars.
What's the capacity of an individual inverter in terms of watts? What do you use?
So 33.3 kilowatts AC per inverter. And there's actually a bunch of different models that you can use depending on the voltage and the system design, but that's usually the standard for a 3-phase inverter.
Okay.
Well, I have one thing to add on the financials. I've looked through the financials for this project on the lens of I'm for the city and for this investment for the city, and I think that looking at this project as an investment for the city, you might be able to see it a little differently. So yes, the investor is taking advantage of a tax credit, but that's something that the city cannot take advantage of if we bought the solar outright on our own. So the investor gets the tax credit, but we're still buying that energy or the solar at a lower rate than we would if we invested it ourselves. And after we purchase the solar panels, we still get a savings from energy because we won't be buying it off the grid. So that's still further investment into this school and into ourselves to be able to use that money elsewhere and then invest it back into the students. I also wanted to add that we're going to be buying energy anyway, so paying that 8 cents and then getting that 2% increase each year, that's something that we might be paying anyway, or we will be paying anyway to either Eversource or that third-party provider if we didn't have solar, plus delivery fees. So that 2% increase over 6 years is not going to outweigh the costs, or it's not going to be more expensive than buying energy off the grid with delivery fees. We're going to be getting a savings, and we'll be winning, the city will be winning, as will the investor, but at the end of the day, why can't 2 entities win at the same time?
And I understand what you're saying. Personally, I have solar hot water in my home. We've had it for 35 years. We got the tax break.
That's amazing.
What concerns me is the tax break they're receiving is money that's coming out of the government that has to be replaced, and we're the ones paying that. That's how I'm looking at this project. It's like they're getting the tax break, and the people who pay the taxes are the ones that are paying for those tax breaks. And I'm looking at it that way, and that concerns me. Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you. There was something that was said before. What if someone gave you $650,000? So as a Board of Education, if someone came along with $650,000, what is the highest and best use of that money for our students? Because it's a rare gift, right? Would I spend it on a solar array for potential savings of electricity? Or would I'd buy textbooks, I'd fill the gap that we know we have around curriculum materials. We have a severe gap. So if you want to try and position the $650,000 investment as something that will benefit the school district, yeah, it will to some extent, but but it's not the highest and best use of the $300,000 or $400,000 we're going to have to buy out with later on. Trust me, we're short right now, this afternoon, about $400,000 on curriculum materials we wanted to buy.
Don't forget what the cost of financing it. What will the bonds cost?
Right, exactly. So it may be perceived as a gift, but that's not the highest and best use of the money that the limited funds we have, even 4 years from now. So I think the financial piece here is where we're stuck. I love solar energy. I used to have a license plate sometime. I would love to put it on my house. Would I do it? Probably not. But I am familiar with the technology. One of the things we discussed at the last meeting was the efficiency of a solar collector. You have 50 years of technology. I remember I'll give my age away, at the 1964-65 World's Fair in New York, the first time I saw a solar panel promoted by AT&T. 40 years later, the efficiency on these panels, Dan Weeks said last time, was about 19%. So we're putting, I think it's cool, it'll make it look good, but I don't think the financials are in the best interest of the school district. City has made a commitment. Sadly, I think if their financials are like our financials, which I imagine they would be, my vote is a no. I'll be upfront and say that. I guess, Mrs. Oden, back to you.
Ms. Porter, and then we'll go over there.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can
No,
wait.
no, go.
Okay. To go back to the cost of dismantling it at the end, so as I understand it, whether we stay with the PPA or we purchase, either way, we're responsible for removal of the panels at the end of their life?
Nope, if you terminated and the PPA does provide for optional 2 5-year extensions if you wanted to continue beyond 25 years. But at the end of the 25-year PPA term, the investor would be responsible for removing the equipment if the school decided that was the path.
So if we stay with them, that they remove it, and if we purchase it, then we remove it? Yes?
Yeah, and so the most likely scenario would be that you would replace the modules with some new equipment, but the racking, there's no reason why that would not be still
So
useful.
would it be like hundreds of thousands of dollars, or? I'm
Yeah,
just trying to anticipate at the end of the life, because whatever it costs, if we were to purchase, and then we have to dismantle or replace the panels at some point, that eats into what your savings are over the life of it. It's just another, an anticipated expense, and having, sat through many budget cycles, there's no extra money there. We don't even have deferred maintenance enough to maintain what we already have. So I think that it's kind of an unknown what we might face for removal sometime in the future.
Yeah, we can certainly estimate it. At 40 years, it's a little bit difficult to predict exactly what that would be. But, again, you'd have option to swap out the panels for whatever the latest technology is, or the option to remove and dismantle. Those options exist. I guess this slide, the purpose, I think, addresses a lot of these comments. So, essentially what this is showing is that if you did nothing, you could continue to pay Eversource and your third-party supplier a certain amount for your energy that you're using, and the DOE projects that so I guess, first of all, the last 30 years, energy costs have increased by an average year-over-year of 3.2%, which, by the way, inflation is compounded. And then as you look forward, for the next 25 years, the Department of Energy projects that energy costs will increase by an annual average of 2.5%. So there is no scenario where the school district will stop paying for energy. The option is essentially to continue paying an ever-increasing amount that's going to the utility. Or here's another option. Certainly efficiency measures to reduce the amount of energy consumed are also highly recommended. If you haven't done full LED conversions, we talked a little bit about that with Sean, those are opportunities. It's not an either or, it's a both, really. But essentially, this is an opportunity to reduce operating costs on the energy side. And that's sort of why the solar PPA is set up that way. As you've all identified, this is a financing vehicle. And so the idea is that somebody else will put up the capital. You're able to reduce your operating costs right away. And that money can be used for the good things that you do as a school district.
Sean?
Yes, a couple of comments. Could you, Elijah, could you go back to the slide where you had the actual savings?
Is that the one you're looking for?
That's the one. That was fast. I was looking at you, I was like, boom. Before I get there, though, so, Mr. Kaufman, we've had, I don't know, whatever 1,000 units equates to in terms of poundage. When the school was originally built, it had the old solar systems, which were the bigger pipes with glycol or something. I don't know how that technology worked back there in the 1970s, but it was very much more heavier than what this will be. Just that aside. The 650 curriculum.
My concern was never the weight. It was just the sheer number of panels, so people had a sense of the scope of what's up there.
Okay.
That was the purpose of my point, was there's 1,000 panels on the roof. That's a lot of anything.
Right. So one of the things 1,000 panels will do is going to shelter your roof membrane. So it's a rubber membrane. It does fall apart, ultraviolet rays and whatever from the sunshine. When you put the panels up there, it's shaded. So your roof is going to last longer. I could do my philosophical discussion on 650 from, I view it as pennies from heaven. Could it be better used in curriculum? It's not being offered for curriculum at this point. It's just, if you had a very targeted trust set up to pay for curriculum, that'd be one thing, but this is not even the same argument. But so when I considered all of this, when I first started looking at solar myself, I was looking at what can we save the school district. That's all I've tried to do with our utility costs for the 20 some odd years I've been here, is find out ways to save us money. And to me, just go down to the last two lines, and that's what we potentially can save with this. Regardless of what the financials are, and regardless if they get 50% of the tax advantage up front, the Plan Ops director doesn't care. I just look at the bottom line, and you're going to save $565,000 over 25 years. That looks awfully good to me, because regardless of what we pay at any point, this one includes the buyout after 6 years, right? Or at the 6-year point.
Yep.
Okay. Do we have one that shows without the buyout what we would save?
I could provide that model. So again, the cash flow sheet will show year 6 buyout with a column, annual and cumulative, and then it'll show term PPA over 25 years. If you stay in the PPA, what is my annual savings?
So off the top of your noggin, can you tell me, is that north or south of 565 for the 25 years?
You will certainly save less if you do not buy it out.
Say that again, please.
You'll certainly save less if you don't buy it out, but you will obviously avoid the risk of, needed capital expenditure.
So it'll be somewhat less than the 565?
Yep.
That's what you're saying? Okay. All right, that's all I had.
Yeah, so I think, Sean, looking at the details of this model, I'm a bit of a skeptic when it comes to money. Someone that's trying to sell me something, telling me they're saving me all this money. Well, does it cover this? Does it cover that? Does it? And there was a model with all that detail. So as Elijah said, he'd be happy to share it with us. I think that would help answer some of those questions. Because if it's 40 years, and I know, even if the roof's shaded, it's not lasting 40 years. So at some point, you got to take them off and fix your roof. That's not going to be cheap. But the reality is, the other costs of running through the way we get our power now, there's some costs associated with that too. So you got to look at both things as you compare and contrast the two technologies. But with, it's interesting, we did get a lot of good financial questions, which kept me very interested, actually.
Is that the first time, Mr. Donovan, we've done that for you?
Yeah, some of the discussions do get a bit tedious for me, I will admit. But so I think maybe we take a look at that model. That is a good idea.
Yeah, I did ask on the side, just responded somewhat, what the city intends to do. Okay, because they're putting it on 4 roofs is the plan at this point, probably more in the future. Doesn't sound like you had a plan if they're going to buy it out after 6 years or not. Maybe Deb could.
No, we don't currently have a plan in place that says we'll escrow the amount of money for the next 6 years, in that that would afford us the opportunity to buy it outright. There is, as you know, the opportunity to bond it, but I think we're going to wait and see how it goes. I don't think that I don't know how the school district works with their money, but squirreling that money away for a specific purchase, I'm not sure happens very often in a municipality. So I think what we'll end up doing is waiting and reviewing each year to see what the savings are, to see where electric costs are going, and sort of playing it by ear as we go.
Just have a germane follow-on to that, if I
Sure.
could. So as you know, the city does have a capital equipment replacement fund, SERF, which we take advantage of that through buying our vehicles. To my knowledge, that's primarily what it's for.
Yes,
But
it is.
I can't, but it also includes trailers and generators, anything that's on wheels, basically, it covers
Right,
that
but
sort
not
of
like
thing.
large fire trucks. So it's typically things that cost between 25 and 80,000, 100,000 or so.
Right. I mean, I could just see something like this falling in that domain, if the city chose to do that.
There's no wheels on this thing.
No.
Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you. 2 points. With this slide, 25-year net savings, $565,000. Quick calculation, $22,600 a year, assuming all that is appropriate. So that's what an annual savings might be in terms of money available to the district. The second thing, if we consider the buyout and the possibility of the bonding and the cost of bonding, I just want to remind the board of a meeting we had last night, which most of us attended, where we were talking about a new middle school project, or at least renovate. Well, it's a big project. It's well over $100 million of bonding. So now that's got my attention as a priority as a taxpayer and a board member. And if I have to go to the city and ask for bonding, I'm looking at educational specific things, and the school is going to be a big ask as it is. To go 5 or 6 years from now and say, hey, I want some money for some solar panels, right around the time we're in the middle of the middle school project, whatever it turns out to be, I think is a bad message for the taxpayers. I think we should focus on the academics. We have a middle school project. It's going to be huge. It's going to take several years to build out. We know we have to bond well over $100 million. What was it, 70 and 78 and, well, 93 and 12, so that's your 105, and then there was another 24 million. So that's the scope of those middle school projects. That's where we should be putting our attention. I don't think we should go this route at all. We got better things to do. I like buying our electricity instead of having to be responsible for producing and maintaining it.
Ms. Porter.
Do these savings go to the city or to the school department?
Well, the energy savings, if we're paying less for electricity, that would accrue back to the school district.
have to
Because the cost for our electricity is in our operating budget, so we
So
would.
our budget wouldn't be reduced by the amount of savings on here? What we get, I guess.
Let's say that 20,000 number that Mr. Kaufman just mentioned, if that, if we never put any money down on the array until the end, when it was 25 years, when it's 30 grand or whatever, then yeah, that money would accrue back in energy savings to the operating budget.
And it would stay with us in the school department?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Moser, do you have any comments?
Oh, like I said, I think that we need a little bit more evaluation on this financing because it is so convoluted. And you know, I agree in scope with Howard that with the forthcoming necessity for bonding for the projects to update our schools and for the new school. I really don't see where we're going to be putting anything into solar panels right now. But you know, with you know, let's say $100 million plus in bonding, and what is the interest rate going to be? Is the interest going down, or if it goes up? If it goes up, we've got to pay interest on the money. So it's going to cost us a lot of money to take care of the academics and get the kids in the schools that are new and safe and properly secured. So I don't see where we're going to do anything of real benefit right now with solar. I mean, it's a nice concept, you know, and like Howard mentioned about the geothermal. Geothermal was a dud. We looked at that top and bottom, you know, years ago, and it was a dud. We couldn't do it because there just wasn't enough energy in the ground to take out to heat the schools. So I mean, it's we have to look first of all at our schools and what we're going to get benefit to our students. Anything after that, I'm sorry.
Okay. Mr. Kaufman?
Thank you. Will you accept a motion? I mean,
Yes.
okay. Move to suspend indefinitely any discussion, consideration, or approval of any photovoltaic energy project at the Nashua School District.
I'll second it.
And by indefinite suspension, it is off the table for us for the rest of this year.
For the at least the remainder of the term of the current board. Here's what I did.
So let me read the motion again. Mr. Kaufman made the motion to suspend indefinitely any discussion, consideration, or approval of any photovoltaic energy project at the Nashua School District. Do I have a second?
You got a second already.
A second. Okay, I'm sorry, Mr. Moser. Okay. And we'll take a vote on that. Mr. Kaufman?
Yes.
Mr. Moser?
Yes.
Mrs. Oden is yes. Motion passes unanimously. Okay. Okay. So the next time that can come up is in January. It is off the table for now. There are elections in November. So we'll see what the composure, how the board is composed next time, and if there's a great call for solar, then I would imagine it'll be brought up again. So, Mr. Smith.
So in the meantime, it'll probably take some time to pull it together. You asked, or there was a discussion about various financial models, additional financial information. Okay, I'm looking at Dan. Do we have a clear understanding what those are? And that we
Well,
can
I think
ask
if they're
Elijah
willing to,
do that?
yeah, I think they're willing to, Elijah said they would, we can take a look at those in the next couple of months. So assuming if it does come up again next year, next calendar year, we'll have more information at that point.
Yes.
And I'd like to add that perhaps, Elijah, when you're pulling that sheet together, if you could also include what the cost savings are if we enter into that agreement and then do nothing, play it out until year 25 and then have the structures removed, what the cost savings would be just for that. So essentially doing nothing, but signing the paperwork and having the solar put up, waiting 25 years, having it taken down, and still achieving those, although somewhat lower, but those savings as well. And I would also like to let Sean and Dan know that as we move forward with the solar, with the 2 and 3 facilities in the city, I'm happy to keep you appraised of how that plays out, and, good, bad, or otherwise, to keep you further informed on how the projects are working, to make sure that is something that the school district might still be interested in, even at the start of the new term.
I think you're right, and thank you. I know this wasn't the result that you people were looking for, but maybe we're more cautious. I think the amount of what we would have to pay to purchase it is a concern. We just don't have that type of money in the school district. We are tying other boards and the district for years. But maybe we'll learn something from your experience as the city moves forward with this that will have some implications that maybe people want to look at it again. So thank you. Thank you. Now, item 3, energy savings.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, so in your package should be a spreadsheet. I did an analysis of where our energy costs were in 2010 versus where they are this past year. And if I were to put down fiscal year 19, so these are all as of the end of this past June. So I wanted to look at what our costs were, and the common denominator you have to use when you compare electricity and natural gas is BTUs, British thermal units, and there are conversion rates for each of those. So that's the comparison across the board. So looking at an FY, the reason I picked fiscal year 10 is that is about the time we started the renovation at Fairgrounds Elementary. And then we did Ledge Street, and then Charlotte Avenue, and then Broad Street and Sunset. So then I compared it to where we stand now. You go to the, not the last column on the right, but the next one to it, it shows the percentage of change in BTU usage. And then in the note column, in the far column, right-hand column, is what's changed in the meantime. So, for example, at Amherst Street, we haven't done anything, typically to affect electricity, and it's actually gone down in of its own volition. The thing you have to be careful of these numbers is if you look at the heating degree days in fiscal year 10 versus fiscal year 19, it was actually hotter in 19. So your electricity use is going to go up, assuming your equipment stays the same. Similarly, if you look at the CDD as the cooling degree days, we had a lot more of those in fiscal year 19 than we did in fiscal year 10, so you're going to use more natural gas. So, so against that backdrop, despite the hotter summers and the cooler winters, we still saw a percentage decrease in our usage. Clearly, wherever we installed LED lights, there was a decrease. With one exception, let's see. So Maine, Dunstable, Birch Hill, we just finished those projects this summer, so these numbers don't reflect their use at all. But the ones we've done in the past, you can start to see the decrease in usage. And the other thing I was interested in, what about when we do renovations? What does that do to us? So you can see the results here. So Broad Street and Sunset Heights, which are the last two we did, actually had an increase in use. It's primarily because we installed air conditioning or dehumidification in each of those two schools. So your electrical use went way up. Interesting enough, and not surprisingly though, the natural gas use went down because we did install more efficient boilers and we have full and better controls of the heating system. So you can see if you go to more of the secondary schools, Elm Street went down. We did do some LED conversions, primarily in the tech ed spaces of the school. Fairgrounds Middle School, we added, it says AC there, but dehumidification, all the CTE classrooms as you face the school on the right-hand side. Not all just CTE, but also music and that sort of, those programs. Pennachuck, we did convert the LEDs and we saw the decrease. High schools, really, it's subject data because the meter went bad at the North High School. So that number that says, and I put a box around it on purpose. So the nearly 105,000 cubic feet of natural gas probably should be more in the order of what was used at the South High School. So that total decrease of minus 1.5 is probably actually an increase. So it's just an interesting exercise I went through just to see what happens to when we do all these utility projects, but also when we do the renovations, the effect on our utilities. And generally speaking, when you see the annual budget that we present to you every year, we show you about a 10-year run, I think, of energy costs. And on general, those have been, at worst case, staying even, but more importantly, going down because of all the measures we've done. We said with the solar that it may only save $22,000 a year, but that on top of all the other things we're doing has resulted in overall savings through the years. So, if there's any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. I know when we renovated Fairgrounds Elementary, only part of the building got the air conditioning or the dehumidification system. Do we have any intentions of running that throughout the rest of the building?
So it's primarily I don't believe the cafeteria has air conditioning. So it's the back wings. I think in those schools it might be the higher grade that's back there, 5th grade or whatever. I do have it I do carry a number in deferred maintenance. And so
you do carry a number in deferred maintenance for that?
To convert the classroom rings in the back. Trouble is, deferred maintenance never gets funded.
Oh.
So to answer your question, yes, at least there's a plan I'd like to put in place, but
There's no money for the plan.
yes.
I know we took care of some of the rooms at Mount Pleasant last year or the year before. Are there any other schools that have no air conditioning or dehumidification system?
So if I can just go down the list here,
Elm.
like Birch Hill and Maine D do have air conditioning on the 2nd floor of the classroom wing, but nowhere else in the school.
Birch Hill and Maine Dunstable?
Yes.
Okay.
And Dr. Crisp, there is no air. When I say there's no air conditioning, there's none except for typically our libraries The media centers have air conditioning, the main office, nurse's office, places like that. So Bicentennial does not. I'm just go down the list, might make it easier. Amherst Street does have, we'll just call it air conditioning instead of going back and forth with dehumidification. Bicentennial does not, Birchill does not, Broad Street does, Charlotte Avenue does with the exception of that back wing. Dr. Crisp does not. Fairgrounds Elementary does, again, with the exception of the back wing. Ledge Street, exactly the same as Fairgrounds. Main Dunstable does not, except for the second floor classroom. Mount Pleasant does in the classrooms on the second and third floor. New Searles does not. Sunset Heights does. Of course, Elm Street does not. Fairgrounds Middle School now is pretty much completely dehumidified. Pennachuck does not. North and South High Schools both have air conditioning.
Okay, wow. Okay, thank you. Mr. Kaufman?
I'm going to ask a very unfair question, okay? And it really is completely unfair, and so if you want to not answer, that's totally acceptable, because I'm not sure you can answer it. It's to, let me ask this. So I recall, we were on the board, I was on the board when we did the Mount Pleasant, those 2 floors that you just spoke about. Do you recall the cost of that?
I want to say it was in the mid-$100,000 range.
Oh, okay.
I believe so. Because we had to install basically individual units in each single classroom. We did share condensers on a roof. We kind of clustered
Were
them
those
together.
splits? Or
Those are
sort of
splits,
like
basically splits. That's it, yeah.
Okay. So just from scale and scope, we're thinking maybe minimally, perhaps, total estimate of maybe $100,000 for each school that doesn't currently have air conditioning. Just to put us, to give myself and perhaps the public an idea. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 schools have none, some are partial. So maybe there's between 500,000 and 600,000. Is it fair to go there?
No, I'd be a lot more than that, because the way Mount
Fair enough.
Pleasant's
Okay.
smaller, the way it's built, it's not
Thank
all
you.
spread out.
Okay, so
I would say Ledge Street, Fairgrounds, Charlotte. We did have a cost for actually doing those back wings, and we didn't do it because of the construction budget. And it was around, well, I've scaled it up since. So right today, it cost about $150 for each of those 3 schools.
okay, so we're looking at a significant amount of money to make those improvements. And I just want people to understand that the reason why we don't do them is we simply cannot, given the budget constraints we have. Mr. Smith is real good about keeping the list, if I can call the list. That's a real list, folks. A list of every capital project. It's prioritized. The board reviews it budget time. Mr. Smith is very good about keeping us updated on the critical needs, and we try to address them. Unfortunately, we can't always do things like this. So it's not like we're ignoring it or we don't want to do it. We just simply don't have the resources. And as Mr. Donovan said, the capital, is it called capital reserve account?
Well, that's one of them, yeah, but the deferred,
Maintenance?
yeah, that's
We
the one.
simply cannot, it's not like we don't want to, but we're unable to fund that at the level we prefer to. So that cash on hand to pay for those expenses is not readily available.
Typically, I ask for, at least historically, $600,000, and we've funded $100,000. So it's effectively what it does is kick the can down the road, and we end up with expensive renovation projects eventually. That's just what it is.
It's not like we haven't been warned.
Right.
So we appreciate that.
Right. So just on the same vein, Amherst Street is probably our next LED conversion. It's really dependent. We use the Eversource's Smart Start program to fund these. And so we've already extinguished our money for this year. Our next one will start on this coming calendar year will be Amherst Street.
Can I ask a question?
Thank you.
Relative to that? So we had energy consultants here that were, particularly we were looking at the high schools, or at least one of them, right? LED was a fundamental part of it. They wanted to do the transformers and, some other gear. That project, that went to the city, it was going to review bonding. I don't recall that I missed something over the last couple of months. Do you know the status of that?
Yes, actually, Dan and I had discussed having them come back tonight.
Oh.
But we had enough, the solar project figured would take up time, and you have other stuff on the agenda, so that's coming next month.
Oh, okay, so it's a timely question.
And this committee actually had asked them some questions, so we've asked them to come back, and they've done a little more homework on their part. They're also, will come with some financing options for us.
Okay, thank you.
And also in here, we have your summer projects. Do you want to, it looks like you got a lot done this summer.
Yeah, so this is more of an FYI. I'll certainly
Okay.
answer any questions you have for it, but, so if you recall when we, it's a mixture of what the minor repair budget that you approve every year. This year, I think it's around 100,000, give or take. So some of those projects are in here, but in the spring, I put together a proposed priority list. I sent it out to the principals, get their feedback, and that's when we develop our summer list of things we do. So this spreadsheet that I gave you does show the priorities. Some of them are in discussion with the superintendent and what's important, particularly if there's a special education, like don't know, they don't call them timeout rooms anymore, but calming rooms, I guess. So if they want to install a new calming room, that goes kind of the top of our list. So that's what this list is. As you can see, we got most of what we'd hoped to get done. There's still a few things we didn't, but then doesn't matter how much planning I do, things pop up. Usually in the summertime, often in the middle of August, and they suddenly decide, well, we better get this done. So that's the next group called unplanned but required, and because of the nature of that, we did get them all done. And then finally, the contractor doing the work. And for the most part, I want to say that, so most of these were part of the deferred maintenance additional funds the school district received. It was about $350,000. So everything that was a part of that was completed with the exception of the 2 emergency generators at Bicentennial Dr. Chris. Those are in order. It'll occur, could occur this fall, but I'm more apt to want to do that during summer, during a break, winter break or spring break, so we don't interrupt potentially service to the school.
I have one question. The chiller tower rehab at North, partial repair pending, wasn't that part of the CTE program? I thought Dr. Dr. Bastoni brought that to us.
No,
That was
those were
part of the culinary program?
Right. No, this is the
Something
tower that's on the roof over near the gym. It
okay.
actually provides air conditioning to the school.
Oh, okay.
What
Very
she brought
different.
forward to you was the refrigerators.
Yes, very
They're
different.
both cold, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, they're both cold. That's good.
Okay, thank you.
The other thing that we haven't, so the tennis courts were done. That was
Uh-huh.
lingering for a long time. And then the security improvements, those were the state grants that we received. Those don't have to be done until a year from this December, so December 2020. In many cases, we're having, actually Harriman Architects are looking at vestibule design and helping us with how we can proceed with that. So those will all get done either during school vacation breaks or next summer.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Smith.
And maybe if an Eagle Scout wants to do, like, painting the central office, that's a possibility, right?
Well, that was the passive-aggressive part of me. I wasn't going to paint your building.
Mr. Kaufman?
Thanks. I just want to comment, I had occasion to visit Maine Dunstable I guess it was last week, Mr. Smith was there, and I'm sorry, I don't remember Doug's last name. Defina. He's the energy manager that the district has, and they were kind enough to give myself and Miss Raymond a tour, and part of that included just the LED lighting that has been installed in the building. We had a chance to speak to a couple of teachers, obviously, Principal Miss I want to say Paradise, but it's Paradis.
Paradis.
Yes, she was great, and they love the lighting. They really, really do. They said going through the process was absolutely worth it. Each of the lightings has a motion detector, so if the principal's walking down the hall and it's completely dark, it's kind of like a movie where as they walk, the lights go on, so they have that safety for themselves. They're completely adjustable, and the lights actually have memory. So if it was set that way the day before, they go back to where you left them. So the project has been, at least in that school, because that's where we were, was very well received. And as you can see from the list, it results in energy savings. But more importantly, the kids can see what they're doing. It's bright, and teachers are happy. We need happy teachers, and the kids are happy too. So I just want to say so the public understands when they get into a school and they see that. But that's gradual. We have 17 buildings, so we have a few of them done. But that's going to be a long-term process. But it's definitely worthwhile from a lot of different angles.
I have one final question. New Searles, it says remove wall on the stage. What's that? Why would you have a wall on the stage?
So last school year, the school was apparently overcrowded, and they needed another teaching space. So what they asked us to do, and I think, and we brought this one up to the superintendent because we wanted to make sure, and we talked to the assistant superintendents, was build a wall on the stage. So it was no longer a stage, there was a wall there. And we had issues, even though we vetted the program with the fire department, but they still weren't happy with the whole solution. So since then, the overcrowding issue, or however that arrived as far as finding a teaching space, was no longer needed. So then we were told, you can take the wall down.
Okay. I just thought that was strange. Thank you.
We did too.
It was a special education program that we ended up moving, so we didn't require it. And the fire department was not happy with the setup,
Right.
so.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Smith, I think you can leave now. You're lucky. It's 2 hours, so maybe we can get through the rest of this rather quickly.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. Same to you. Okay, contracts.
Okay, contract, we only have one contract. This is a contract with Mr. Jeff Levin. He is a counselor to work with students in danger of dropping out of our high schools. This grant, Mr. Levin, I believe this is his second year, possibly third year working with us. This is funded through the Dropout Prevention Grant. This year, when Mr. Chopa put the Dropout Prevention Grant, typically we've been receiving about $300,000 per year. It was reduced to a little more than half of that. But of the items, the Dropout Prevention Grant, and the state sent it back, they said, these are the three things we'd like to fund, and this was one of them. Okay. So Mr. Levin has worked with these students. The good thing, he'll continue to do that. He's actually, I think, been in working, hoping this is getting approved. And I did tell him, since it's funded by the grant, that it should go well. Both principals are happy with the results, so suggest that we approve the contract for services with Mr. Jeff Levin coaching in the Nashua School District. It's $50,000 is the up to total.
Right. Do you know what period during the year he finished up last year?
He started a little later last year, so I think he went until towards the middle end of May.
Oh, okay, quite a bit. Oh, it's 3 days a week. I would like next year when this comes through, if we could get some data. He works with a total of 50 students. If we could see the impact of his counseling and coaching with these students, how many he started with and how many succeeded in completing school.
Okay.
So,
I can check with Mr. Chopa to see if we have any now, but if not, then,
okay.
like I said, if it was 1 year, the data probably isn't all that valuable. After 2 or 3 years, I think it would be a lot more valuable.
Yeah, thank you. I knew the name was familiar. Okay, Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you. So I'm a little confused in that we have the Clearway program, which is designed for high-risk students, and we have the Brentwood program that's also designed for high-risk students. The Clearway program has 2 pieces to it, one for special ed placement and the other for general education, high school education, but over a Clearway for the students that might need smaller class size or whatever their issues might be. And the same thing with Brentwood, as I understand it, is for high-risk students. So why can't we fund more money to Brentwood? Because Clearway, we buy slots, we can't put anybody there. We do have capacity over at Brentwood for some number of students, certainly not 50, but I don't understand why this could not be performed out of Brentwood or more students added to Brentwood now that we have another resource. Can you help me?
They're different kinds of students. The Brentwood students are, there's only about 22 students. Emotional needs, I think, is what drives. So these are highly emotional kids that have a lot of difficulty with dealing with that. So they're separated out of the larger school. The Clearway program, if you remember a couple of years ago when we were considering discontinuing it, that's more for the anxiety kids, the kids that don't like the really large groups. This is another whole set of kids that enjoy the large groups but have a hard time getting the work done, but they have no interest in going to Clearway. And Clearway, frankly, if you go there and you don't follow the rules, they send you right back here anyway. So the reality is there's more students that need these services than those 2 programs. That's only 70 students. We have more than 70 in both high schools.
That's helpful. So the kids that we put in Brentwood need a separate facility for whatever reason, services, as Clearway also provides, more tailored services to a particular
smaller
need.
environment.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I just want, but these kids want to be in the high school, can function in the high school. They just are at risk of dropping out for whatever reason.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, looking for a motion to approve the contract for services between Jeff Levin, coaching, and the Nashua School District for up to $50,000.
So moved.
Okay.
Second.
Mr. Kaufman?
I did second, yes.
Yes. The roll call. And Mr. Moser?
Yes.
And Mrs. Oden is yes, pass unanimously. Okay, now we're on to, we went through the summer facility projects update. Fiscal year September financial report.
Okay, we'll go through this quickly as it's only September, first month of school. Just look at the page 1, the wages column. You'll notice that the current expended is 6.3 million. That's basically 2 biweekly payrolls where all the salaried people get paid and 4 weekly ones. So that's a number you're going to see when that's a typical month, 2 biweeklies and 4 weeklies. And then the other numbers going down, I'm putting together my overtime spreadsheet like I do. I'll have next month the update on the retirement and separation pay. As you can see, we've spent year-to-date on that line item $615,000. So hopefully we've paid off the people that we knew were going to retire and the teachers that are required by contract to put that information out in the late winter. If most of those people are paid, then maybe we'll have a little bit of amount remaining in that account, unless, of course, we have people leaving during the year, but hopefully that won't be the case. Fringe benefits, pretty much defined by the city as far as the costing on a monthly basis. Okay, in the next group, the professional technical services, the legal, that's Mr. Clausen, and it's a little higher than usual because special education required some needs for a legal review they're having done with a couple of students, so we did require some legal services.
Excuse me, do you recall the monthly retainer?
I think it's $3,750 right now, or $3,800, one of the two.
Thank you.
Then the pupil support services line, you can see there's a big number encumbered. Those are the OT and PT contracts that we approved over the summer. And the contracted services, the last line there, basically that's contracts. We signed contracts with Securidyne to cover all our security costs. That was about $95,000. We had the IT had about $60,000 worth of contracts, which is maintenance on their server equipment. We had a few other things. So the numbers are big, but a lot of those are annual contracts. So we did take a look at the details on those. Then the property services, you'll also notice HVAC maintenance, that has a big number in there. Those are the annual maintenance contracts we have with Siemens, which is about, I think, 7 of the schools. Okay, we slide down to page 2. You'll see the bottom one there, 54899, that's rentals. So I took a look at that and I said, okay, that's where we charge Brentwood. I saw amount remaining of $17,000. I said, that's really going to be tough to, since the cost at Brentwood is about $12,000 a month. But basically what happened was all the standard monthly amounts were put in, so they're already in the encumbered line. So it's showing up as expended to date, though we haven't actually sent all the money off, it's in the books. So the $17,000 is what's left, but Brentwood's fully covered for the year. So the other services, there's not too much there, except when we get down to the transportation services. We don't have the invoices for September in. Basically, the largest amounts, we get standard invoices. We agree upon a number of buses, and then they multiply it by the rate, daily rate, and we pay that evenly throughout 10 months of the year. The invoice we got wasn't correct, so we're waiting them to fix it. And then, so next month you'll see 2 of those in there. It'll be a much higher number. Supplies and materials, not too much to say there.
Excuse me, Mr. Donovan, before you jump ahead on the favorite line of the budget, tuition out of district. We obviously tried to fund more of that this year based on the spreadsheet you keep of the various students and the projections for the year. Or you think we'll be on track of what you've got budgeted, or do you think we might have some... I realize you're only in October and it might be an unfair question.
Well, but I think to answer it, the last 2 years it's been $6 million, so we're at 5.7, so it'll probably be a lot closer than $1,800,000 or $1 million. Yes.
Okay, thank you very much.
Supplies and materials, like I said, not too much there. And then the equipment, you'll notice the software, we pay for the software typically in the summer for the full year, so those numbers, there's a significant amount spent in that account. Same with the computer equipment. Though, to be honest, computer equipment's less spent at this time this year than we typically have been. There's a few things that, if you recall, we got some E-rate discounts. So there was some money that wasn't spent right away that we do have plans and we'll be bringing forward in finance and ops over the next couple months. And so that's pretty much it. We're 18.95 spent through the year so far. And like I said, the only thing that was alarming to me initially was the rentals, but that's fine. So all in all, I think we're in reasonably good shape.
Mrs. Oden?
Yes.
So at the last board meeting, when we were asked to approve the unaffiliated salary changes, I had made a motion to, everybody essentially got 2.5%, just general statement. And I had asked if we could give an extra 2.5% to the 8 TIAs, or teaching folks, the instructional folks in the elementary schools that teach your computer classes. And and so the question was, we didn't know if we had money in the budget that could possibly cover that. I think it's 8 people. I thought there were 7 based on the list. Adam Marcoux corrected me. He said there were 8. And the increase of 2.5%, honestly, I don't have a total. I think it was about $500 each, roughly speaking. So do we have $4,000 that could find its way over there?
Actually, not in that pool of money. In that pool of money, since we take 2.5% of what we budgeted for that group of people, that's what gets put aside for raises. We did, and I don't know if you recall, but on that spreadsheet down at the bottom, we did give lunch monitors and crossing guards that 2.5% raise. So when you factor those in, that pretty much used up all except for maybe, $100 of the amount put aside specifically for the non-affiliated.
So is there $4,000 in the budget that could be moved into that line?
It would have to be moved from another line.
Right. Are there any candidates?
I mean, reality, could I find 4,000 somewhere? Maybe. So if that's something the board wants to do, I could probably find 4,000.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to take a motion, Mrs. Oden? Or do we have any other questions?
No, I don't think we have any more on the financial report. Then we'll have the transfer report.
Move to accept and place on file the financial report for September 2019.
Second.
Roll call, Mr. Kaufman?
Yes.
Mr. Moser?
Yes.
Mrs. Oden is yes, pass unanimously. Okay, we'll move on to the fiscal year 20 September transfer report.
Okay. We'll just run through this quick. There's nothing, I think, higher than $4,000. First one is a transfer from Broad Street School where they're moving it. They had a laminator that they were going to charge to computer equipment. We said, no, laminators don't have much in the way of computer chips in them. Let's put that to miscellaneous equipment. So that's just changing the budget so they can charge it to the right place. Second one is Ledge Street School. Now, the Ledge Street School, some board members may know more about this than I, but they're going through this PLC, Professional Learning Community. They, as a school, have decided to use a small amount of their allocations that we give them towards paying basically for staff members to do extra work or for paras to cover for teachers and things like that, so they can get this training going on while school's in session. So that's really what this is.
So is this paying paras for something we can't get a substitute teacher for?
It's paying paras so that the teachers can go into this special training during the school day, yes.
But we can't get subs, so we're asking the paras and we're paying them a premium for doing that.
Yes.
Okay, that's fine. I just want
that's-
to understand that.
Is it a whole day?
I don't honestly know if it's one day or if it's parts of a bunch of days. They took this is just a budget number, so it's not necessarily they've spent this all yet. But they did ask, can we use what we have in supplies and use it for this instead of supplies? And I said, yes, you can.
Okay.
You know, if it were $12,000, they'd say, no, you can't. But for 2,000, you know, a lot of the schools at the end of the year, 2,000, they buy Chromebooks or something, so they want to use it in this way. That's.
Okay.
The next one, Nashua High North, this is just moving it to the right account. They have the NEASC membership, it's $4,700, so they had put it into the contracted services, but we're like, nah, it's more of a membership now. You know, I think they had the money there last year when they did the actual
Okay.
review with them. Okay, the next is district office. Basically, when we did the budget this year, we usually put $4,000 into the ROTC program. Now, what happens is the government turns around and reimburses us for these kind of costs, but they have to have something to charge it to in the first place. So I just took money from one of the district-wide accounts that put it in there so they can spend the money, do the things. Then when the money comes back in reimbursement, we'll then move it back to the district-wide account. And this is a district-wide account that we won't be spending much until the spring.
Okay.
Okay, the next one is, that's the $4,000. So what we did there was we have in the budget, we have some money to support the Lego leagues and the, is it Destination Imagination or whatever it's called now. We help, we buy sort of the registration for them, and then the kids and the families and whatever take off and run the programs. So we just moved it. It was in supplies, but it's really not supplies. It's more / registrations, et cetera. So we put it into that account. The next one, Fairgrounds Middle School, that's, you know, they're purchasing a Chromebook cart, so they moved it from supplies to the Chromebook cart. Next one is High School North, and that's purchase 19 Chromebooks to fill the cart because the special promotion. So there was, during the month of September, we typically pay about $180 for a Chromebook plus the $20 to $25 for the license. For the month of September, we had a deal, they were $155 just for that month. I wish they had made that available in July or the spring, but maybe that's why most people aren't buying them in September, I don't know. So they took advantage of that and spent some of that money then. And then the Elm Street Middle School, they're just moving an amount from supplies to dues and memberships to cover those. That was probably they didn't have enough money in the budget for those dues.
Mrs. Oden? Just quick question, because I remember in the past, and I had asked that the name of the person be typed or at least handwritten underneath the signature so we know who's doing it. I realize your office probably knows the signatures, but just for clarification, I think it would be helpful if the person making the request actually had written their name, or I'm not asking that to be typed, that's probably too difficult in a form, but do we even have a typewriter? But just that...
We do have one typewriter, most people don't know how to use it. It's an old
I'm not
IBM
surprised.
Selectrix.
Yeah. I used to rely
Okay,
on
we can, I think when Paul Calabria was around, he was doing
he
that.
left?
Because he left, yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So we have another person, and Derek Danielson's his name, so I'll have him do that going
Thank
forward.
you. Mrs. Oden, may I make a motion?
Yes.
Move to accept and place on file the transfer report for September 2019.
Second.
Okay. Roll call. Mr. Kaufman?
Yes.
Mr. Moser?
Yes.
And Mrs. Oden is a yes. Okay. That finishes our business for the evening. I'm looking for a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay. Roll call. Mr. Kaufman?
Yes.
Mr. Moser?
Yes.
And Mrs. Oden is yes. Pass unanimously. It is 8:20.